Hi, everyone. Welcome once again. Another Tuesday afternoon here, 1 o'clock on the East Coast. So excited to talk with Michelle. Is it Rademacher? I
You
want
were
to make
super close. Rademacher.
Rademacher. Great. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. And we actually first, I heard I heard when you were talking to Virginia Franco. That was how we first connected because, I've known Virginia for a little while now, and I know you have, and it's so great um, to be able to find, great people as well. And you're based in Florida, I believe, or
Yeah. So I'm in the Panhandle
okay,
and
right?
really far on the west side of it. So we are still in Central Time Zone, kind of. So it's kind of funny. So I'm in Pensacola.
You told me that. And I remember. I think in Indiana they have that split time zone as well. I think it's whether it's Indianapolis or Fort Wayne, depending on where you are. Part of the town is a one zone, part is the other.
Right.
So with the time change, that must have been very interesting.
Oh, I know. I was glad that I could stay because I moved from Illinois. So I just went straight south and I stayed on Central Time Zone. So it was good.
So I know we were talking about different things, and you talked about something called the storms of life. Now, is that something which is related to job search? Is it related to life? I'd love for you to kind of go into a little more detail about that.
Yeah, I think it's related to all aspects of life because I think we all deal with storms. When we look back on the last 2 years, Kenneth, I think we can really recognize that we all thrown into what we could probably categorize as a tsunami, right? It was a lot. And sometimes I think there's a perception to resist the fact that waves are going to hit because we want smooth sailing. I do anyway. And I would definitely say, maybe as more of an idealist or optimist, that's something that has been my expectation. And instead, when we pivot and recognize waves are going to come, they are going to be perhaps indicators. And that's where I think I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, about what is the wave that's coming telling us and how do we navigate it? Because we don't have perfectly smooth sailing careers. That's just not realistic. And if you talk to somebody that's even just 10 years in, they probably can point to like 2 to 3 big disruptors, where those of us in mid-career have a lot more. And then I would say even those that are headed towards retirement, like, yeah, they've seen a few blips in the road or rocky waves, if we're using the same sailing metaphor. So that's a little bit about that.
Well, I want to just, as a little bit of an analogy, Christine Dykman is from the shore. And so we talked about waves there. The thing about New Jersey,
Here, move my camera.
you don't go to the shore, you go down the shore. So that's kind of a little thing here that we talk about.
I didn't know that. Okay.
No, and so I'd love to know more about the waves. I just want to do a couple of other call outs. I don't know if you know Deanna Chris from Chicago or not.
I don't know. I have to look you up, Deanna. Shout out to Chi-Town. That's awesome.
Yes. And then I have Lauren Cutterback from Rhode Island. So
awesome.
When it
East
comes
Coast
to
and
waves,
Midwest.
yeah. So when it comes to waves and things, I've gone through different waves as well, and I think we all have. And I think the challenge is when you're kind of hitting something head on, it's how do you handle it? Because it's never smooth sailing. And just these last 2 years, especially, we've all gone through different things, and it's not a comparison. It's not a case of one better than the other, but it's how do you manage when the wave comes, and can you even anticipate when you might be getting a wave?
I don't know. I think it takes intentionality to anticipate that you're getting a wave that's coming. And just published an article this morning, which is why it was top of mind, Kenneth, for us to discuss it, because there is almost like 5 analogies of what's going on there. Meaning, one that really sticks out to me because of how many people I work with in career coaching and how that toxicity can exist, that if you're recognizing that there's toxicity in a work culture, if you can recenter to some of the things that were working well just for the time in the season before you can actually make an exit, is actually really smart to do. I think we could relate that one to kind of like the riptide and not trying to swim Like you have to kind of swim along shore before you can break out of the rip current, and then you're actually in safety. So in that same concept of being in a toxic work culture, you sometimes don't realize you're in it. I think that's why they always warn of the danger of the rip current, because it's like, oh, I don't even know that I'm in it. So you have to go alongside the things in a work culture that were at least a part of the original joy. I've been in one before, and
Mhm.
it was hard to recognize that it was actually turning away from what I was sold to come into the company. And I'd just be curious, kind of like on your side too, if you've experienced that, conversations you've had with clients.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one that creeps up on people the most, don't you think?
Well, I know when I was actually working in corporate, there were some very toxic workplaces, and it's so tiring to be there. You can't
Yeah.
even do your job because it's so tiring to know what you're going to be dealing with. And the first time it happened to me, I didn't leave in time, which I mean,
Mhm.
by then it was like, I was so worn out and I finally just, packed it in. But recognizing it when I was going for job interviews, I would, it's hard to ask that question right off the bat, but I would actually reach out to other people just to get a sense of things, because I don't want to be miserable. I mean, and I think that's part of the balance. And I think it isn't even just the workplace from a professional standpoint, but how does it impact you personally? And even when I
Oh,
work
I
with
know.
clients, yeah.
That is so tough. And in fact, I'm thinking back to when I was in that toxic work culture, and it was like you why I can speak so confidently and see it in other clients is that a number one key indicator is the confidence in your own skill set has eroded. That's like one of the biggest. But I find the interesting nature of this, like how you can swim alongside shore before you can kind of get to safety, is there was something that was originally there that made you interested. Try to hone in on that, like use it as your life preserver, but be super intentional about the exit plan, because otherwise I think you'll just get swallowed up. I mean, that's another one we should talk about, is just when you're drowning and you can't see a way out. I feel like we need to have more people that'll come alongside us, but we have to raise our hand and be like, I
Mhm.
need help. How many people do you feel like kind of you've seen that are just like not doing that? Or maybe you see it through things like this, that people have community
Well, I
around
think
it.
one pivot in the workplace now is that if you need help, it's a little more normal, if you will, to ask for help as opposed to just sitting at your desk and just trying to figure it out and acting like you know everything. When I was working in corporate and even the beginning, I would say I know something because even though I didn't, because I'd be expected to. In the last few
Mhm.
years when I was working, and even as a business owner, I know what my limits are. And I'm not going to misrepresent myself. And I think it's so important to know that about yourself instead of promising something to everyone. Just being confident and being comfortable asking questions and knowing what your limits are. And I think that's one thing about this generation coming up. I mean, if you will, my kids are of that age and they don't mind asking questions. They don't mind learning because they have their limits. And I think that is
Yeah.
so important. I just want to call this out here because I think this is very true. Talking about this normalizes, we all go through waves and storms in life, and it's not just professional, it's personal. We all have our personal challenges, and that also impacts the way you're working. So I think having to have a conversation in a general way, sometimes the stuff going on has nothing to do with work, but everything to do with your performance.
I love that too. And I thank you for the comment, because I maybe it again comes from an idealistic place, an optimistic place, because I definitely am the personality type kind of that sees the glass half full. And I don't know why I just would avoid the fact that the storms are going to hit. And it only took a good handful of them. Tsunamis for me in my career life would have been the 0809 recession. I was laid off in January of '09. And then I would say another big disruptor was having been into toxic work culture, to where I was like, I have to leave. It was also at the culmination of when I knew I needed to make a career pivot. But looking back, they were definite blessings because they redirected me. And I just, let's use this analogy further. The first big tsunami of '08, '09 should have been my redirect, but
Mhm.
I went back in to the same pathway because I thought that's how it will be solved for what was going wrong. And if we do normalize and talking about it, I would say do it with a trusted circle, because sometimes people are well intentioned, but they throw on us their own values. A pivot that I hope we can talk about in the conversation, Kenneth, I'll just plant it now, is the best career pathways or professions for the next generation to come through. So we'll talk about that maybe
Sure.
later. But yeah, it was really, what were your biggest like tsunamis in your career?
First biggest tsunami I had was kind of out of necessity. After I was in a field which was not paying very well. So as
Mhm.
I got married, I realized I had to do a career pivot, a total career pivot into IT, which was the best
Ooh.
thing I could have done at the time. But I realized probably about 10 years in, I hated it.
Oh no. Yeah.
But I was
Went
kind
for the money, but it was like, this is not fun. Yeah.
of no. So 2008 came along, and fortunately, I lost the job that I had, and I'm saying fortunately because it was something I absolutely despised, and
Yeah.
so it gave me some time to think about what I wanted to do. And I've kind of blended over time a lot of the things I've done from everything. And I think for me, the challenge that I found more than anything else is not being able to get all the help and support. In a lot of places, when you're working in some places, you don't know who to trust, how much
Hmm.
to trust, how much to share and not to share. So for me, the final pivot was I was at a job and I thought one thing was happening and something else was happening behind the scenes I knew nothing about. I was like out of the loop, and I'm like, this is it. I'm out of here. I can't,
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with this anymore. Life's too short.
Right.
So, as a small business owner, there's good days and bad days, but at least I feel fulfilled in what I'm doing. And I think a lot of people that I counsel, as even those in transition, once they realize that they have a certain amount of control over their situations, it's very freeing, you know.
Hmm.
So when I talk to people, I try to talk from my background, but again, my background is just a starting point. So
Hmm.
it's so important, to recognize that. And
I totally do too. And okay, so using the analogy of the waves, and like a current has pulled you away, perhaps,
Mhm.
of like what you should be doing or could be doing. Um, there is something to be said for knowing your own values, to know what your path should be. Because I think really well intentioned people, Kenneth, actually give advice based on their own values, and it's like they're not realizing they're doing it, but they're like putting that on top of somebody, like, and just directing them this way. They're like, no, chart your course over here. And the reason I wanted to talk about like this other aspect of new professionals, and or just even we coach people, we see it all the time,
Mhm.
the fact that your path is supposed to be known by you, and don't let somebody deter you from it. One of the things that irked me so much in the 0809 recession was when I saw this article. It was a top publication. I don't know if it was Chicago Tribune, but I remember it was one of the articles of the newspapers that were slapped on the table in the lunchroom. So probably a Trib or some other established newspaper at the time. And it was talking about a profession to not go into because of the 0809 recession. Well, guess which one it was? Architecture. And here we are in this architecture firm, and it's blasted all over this paper. And I just thought, that's so terrible, because they're encouraging a next generation to not pursue something that actually could be their path. And I'll say, because we're obviously several years past 0809, Kenneth, we have a deficit in that industry of good talent for the roles that need to be filled. It still remains like a hot talent market for recruiting. So how much, well, I guess I'm posing a question back, but I
Mhm.
think I see this too often, where people are encouraging those to go into a profession based on their own value set, which sometimes is monetary, like they have a value of money and what they can achieve in their career. And they somehow think that that's going to be the best path, when in fact, they're forsaking their gifts, they're forsaking the talent, they're forsaking the day to day tasks. It's just really bad advice that I see thrown around a lot.
But I think the last couple of years have kind of shown me people feel very comfortable as can be during the pandemic, working from home. managing things and kind of getting an inner feeling about priorities. All of a
Yeah.
sudden it's, here in New Jersey, commuting to the city was something I did for many, many years. And then the funny thing is now, if I go to the city, it's going to be by choice. I can do the same work at home I can do elsewhere. So then the challenge becomes from the corporate side. When people want you to come back to work, it's not that you're afraid with COVID. You just don't want to, because you can be much more valuable and productive from home. So that's where the discussion has to be. Very important to have personal relationships, but there's got to be a compromise. And
I
I
agree
think
with that. In fact, it's like another layer to like pathway. But then now that we have a change in work from home or work from the office or this hybrid model, we need to listen and be, I would say companies need a definite task force to listen to their talent and see how they can adapt for their industry. If I pull back into the architecture realm to just say this about the industry, I have clients that come from that world and still stay in touch with that world, if you will, Kenneth. And I think they're trying their best. It's hard though, because having been in the architecture world, you love doing design work in community, which means you're in person. But there is so much joy in being able to set your own day. So it's like, how are you balancing those differences of opinion and preferences? It's not an easy topic, and I think it's another one where when we see people shoving this perception of what they should do onto every industry, that's not really fair to listening to what works for them and or another industry type.
so. Joey brings up realizing the value of getting help makes you wonder why you didn't ask for it sooner, and that is so true. Once you break out and you're willing, Joey always says, I'm happy to not be the smartest person in the room at times because I'm always learning, and it's a relief to know that you give yourself permission to ask the questions and not have to feel like that person that knows everything. It's such a great weight lifted off, definitely off my shoulders, because I don't want to know everything, not because I want to focus on what I do best.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely true. Like when we can remain curious, and that's something you mentioned about the next generation, kind of like they're not afraid to ask questions. You remain curious if you do throughout your career. I believe it's one of the best things you'll do because you're willing to learn and to listen. That's a good comment from it's Joey. That was good
Oh,
comment.
Joey Himmelfarb, Himmelfarb. We've had many discussions over time. He's actually now doing some presenting as well. And
Cool.
I don't think we've ever met in person, actually, which is the thing I'm looking forward to now. Is we're actually getting together, meeting together in different places. Um,
Good.
yeah, I think I guess Marty Constant, who was bringing a bunch of people
Love
together.
Marty.
Yeah,
Yes.
she was with Erica before, and she's saying a shout out to Brenda. And Marty was actually one of my speakers a couple weeks ago. And she's right. There's so much discontent in general in so many different levels. It's a combination of technical challenges and perceived career mismatches, and you just have to get to the place where there's things you can and can't control. If you try to control everything, nothing happens.
Mm.
Because again, we all have different challenges. I mean, 3 years ago, I don't think I would have envisioned doing what I'm doing here, which is having chats every week.
I
So out
love
of my
that.
comfort zone. And next week or so, I'm actually going to be doing another lifelong, thing. I'm looking forward to teaching.
Oh, that's so good. I can see
I'm
you.
actually looking forward to some real teaching in front of people, and it's a very scary thought to actually doing this, but they actually asked me to actually teach a class.
I think you're gonna be awesome, Kenneth.
I'm scared. I am so scared to death.
Oh no, you're gonna be great. In fact, I think sometimes when we are scared, it allows just like kind of um the when we can share our weaknesses, sometimes I feel like that helps us all know that we're human. But Marty's comment, which hey Marty, I was just gonna say I agree. And the fact that if we can capitalize on what I would consider a tsunami of the pandemic and thankfully like it receding, that we learn from what that storm of life was. And one of the best things has been this intentional redirect by so many people, Kenneth. So discontent is something to pay attention to. It's a wave that's trying to direct you to a new place, and you're not to ignore it. Don't fight it. Like, learn to surf, learn to ride that wave into your next opportunity. But if I can go back to this whole thing about the folks where they give well-intentioned advice, because this is peers, this is colleagues, you're going to go to your trusted network. Recognize that they're always going to advise based on their own filter of values and their value system. And if you know that, you can pick away and kind of pull apart, peel back the onion, if I use another metaphor, what is their perception and what you can take as far as like fact and helpfulness. In other cases, I think that sometimes having an outbound source, like a career coach that we do, Kenneth, or sometimes recruiters help in that, but it's not always really their focus. That can bring you some clarity. And I would just say, don't forsake the pivot. Don't expect it to be done for you. If you are discontented, make steps forward by being curious and starting that process.
When I talk to people that want to do these pivots, before they do it, I say, why do you want to do the pivot? It's, to say tangibly, it's like I lost my job and I need to go in a different field. That's an answer, but it's not necessarily the right answer. You really have to think, do you want to go down that path? Is the answer maybe to talk to people in the industry? Or you can just be going through the same thing a year or 2 years from now that you just went through. Really got to look inward. And that goes to your whole idea with the waves and things. Look about what you want to do, things you're not sure about, and kind of do that inward, deep dive, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. Sorry, I thought you might have had a question.
No, not at all. I mean, I think for me, and this is why I'm actually thinking about teaching. I'm not going to be teaching per se, but I'm going to be opening dialogues, because people don't like to be taught necessarily directly, or people want to be looked down to. And I don't mean that in any disrespect. I'm just more of an engagement type person. I just want to have a discussion or a dialogue. I mean, I have my thoughts, but I want people to kind of feel comfortable sharing their thoughts too.
I think it's a really important thing for all of us to encourage critical thinking, to question the narrative, and to pursue alternative sources. And that totally can relate to careers. We have a lot of noise, I think, on the LinkedIn platform, Kenneth, when it comes to advice. And part of that challenge for folks that are curious and looking is that there's just like the ping pong of advice. So let's go back to the values, because if you're going to surf the wave, you have to know your own contribution. And that helps guide what you will take in and what you will throw out. So yes, I agree with that. I think you're going to do awesome in the teaching. What is the subject matter? What are you going to
actually, it's going to be at a local university, because I'm actually a mentor there. And they asked me to teach a class to students. And I never thought I could handle high school and teaching and that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I found with college students, they're very inquisitive. And these are actually first generation college students. So they have different challenges at home.
That's amazing.
It's not just about the job search. It's about other challenges in communication. And we're going to see how it goes. I mean, it's was always on my bucket list to teach.
Okay.
Didn't think I could do it.
You got that one checked off the list. That's awesome.
But I would really love to hear more from the audience too. I mean, I love chatting with Michelle. I really do. But I want to also see what other people have going on, because I think one of the challenges that I have, and to some extent, is knowing how what are the challenges you face. I have a sense of what I think the challenges are, but I'd love to hear from other people, about what they can and can't do, in general. I mean, so, I'll give it a couple of seconds, and as we continue chatting, have to laugh because Amanda is someone I've been working with, and she is a teacher, or actually is looking to go down in that path. What I find from one industry to the other is so many soft skills, so many things that are relatable. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing I've taught myself a lot is to listen to people more, and not be so quick to do the next answer, or and just seeing where it goes, because that was not my DNA. And they're very
Yeah. I would say that learning to listen is a good skill to develop and one that I also have to work on.
so what are some of the challenges when you talk about the different waves and things? Are there some waves that are higher or more challenging than others, do you think, in a general way? Or is it just every person has their own, you know, definition of what those waves are? What have you found?
I think first we need to recognize that storms in life will always come and that they're actually there to help teach us lessons and to refine us and make us better. And if we can acknowledge that and that they weren't going to just never be existent, like I was saying, the waves will always crash on the shore. They are consistent. Then you begin to understand a rhythm to your own walk. And I would say sometimes, Kenneth, depending on if you learned the lesson or not, you might get a similar test or trial. But in a career path, I think part of it is testing your character. And so if you've not led people before, but you now find yourself in a management or a leadership role, then you're going to have a different kind of storm related to learning how to do that well. And if you are first in the C-suite, that's a different category of how you partner with your board of directors and how you perceive the challenges that are coming through your customers, because you can't just only look at it from your perspective. I would say that's always the case. We should lead with a C-suite mindset, whether we're in that role or we're not. But when you look at a career trajectory, it's always forward motion, or that's the hope. And it doesn't mean that if you've taken a step back, that it can't be that is honoring a path for you. In my own career, I would say that some of the waves that have hit have been to direct me, and I've ignored them. And so for me, it's an encouragement to those that if you're finding yourself, which I think was the big thing about 2020 and all of life, was a redirect. It might have been personal, but we're in the professional bucket here talking about that. I've seen more career realignments kind of out of that time period. And I think that's the blessing out of what happened.
So Chris, so why do you think, and I agree with this, hiring managers and to some extent recruiters aren't quite there yet. They were in the very beginning. When this happened and they were all looking for work, all of a sudden we had a bunch of job seekers out there who were thrown into this, at all different levels. And now as things are normalizing, if you will, for some reason, there's still a disconnect. There's so many managers out there and even recruiters who don't understand that there are people with multiple talents that can go to different places and have ups and downs and have job gaps, and it's not a bad thing, but they still have that blinders mentality, whether it's a recruiter who has to find something for a hiring manager, just a hiring manager when they interview. So, I mean, how do we try to get them, if you will, on the same page, or can we?
I think we totally can, but I think it's actually a re-education of what recruiters do. So a recruiter is not a career coach. They're super different. Most people treat a recruiter like a coach, as if they will help them get the role. That's really not what happens. And I think it starts with the job seeker themselves, Kenneth. If the job seeker is very clear about what they want to do and they present themselves in light of that, and the recruiter has an opening for that role type, then it's an easy conversation. What tends to happen insofar as confusion about it is the job seeker assumes the recruiter and the recruiting process means they're going to help them see how to take their skill set where they've done X, and maybe they're doing a little bit of a version of X or it's Y. It's just not what happens. So when I meet with somebody, because I'm now in a recruiter seat again, I love being back in that space. I love both sides. So I like take off the recruiter hat and sometimes put on the coach hat. Just last night, I had an interview with a candidate. And I said, okay, I'm going to take off the recruiter hat for a second. I'm going to tell you something you need to know. So I love both, but it is a real misperception. And so it's both and. The other thing, Kenneth, is that we have a lot of green recruiters on the scene. A lot of people have thought, and I'm not saying it isn't their path, but they have seen it as a potential path, that maybe it's an easy route or one that they can do from home. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying we do have a lot of green recruiters. And case in point, I just had a call with a potential client, and the kinds of questions she's getting makes her question her own presentation, when in fact I just said, you're really just dealing with somebody in a recruiter seat that doesn't know what you do. Because if they did, then they wouldn't have these kinds of questions. They wouldn't present to you these kinds of opportunities that are super junior. So it's an education, I think, on all sides, but more so from the job seeker. Do you think that there's a reason that there's a perception that the recruiter figures it out for the client or the candidate? Because that's the part that sort of makes me scratch my head.
Well, here's the thing. Having been a hiring manager at one point, I can tell you right now that job specs are wish lists that are put together by multiple people, and it's about what the job entailed before as opposed to what the job can do later on.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
Yeah.
And then they don't focus on the main bullet points of it. You know, it's like I'll always tell my job seekers when they have an interview, one of the first questions, say, what are the 2 or 3 main things you need that person to do to hit the ground running? What are the tasks? Not the 2-page job spec. And then you build on that. That's a big part of the disconnect in hire, and recruiters are tasked with getting someone for that job, which is an impossible thing at times because they're looking for multiple things that don't exist. I mean, that's the part of the discussion which easier said than done. People should hire people, but there's also this mindset from hiring managers that they don't want to make a decision if it's the wrong decision, so they'll do multiple rounds of interviews, and they're afraid if it doesn't work out, and it's like this. So
there is a reason that they're afraid, though, because it's a very expensive prospect to hire someone incorrectly. It's just expensive. You know, it's 90 days before someone's really up to speed, and then if you did it wrong or got it wrong, it's like, ooh. An entrepreneur that's on the platform that I remember her advice was just that if you know you did it wrong, to course correct quickly. It helps you and helps that person professionally, because otherwise you're just waiting for this inevitable and makes it even harder. But back to your point, Kenneth, about the job description, I think sometimes, well, let's pull way back. With 2020 and everything that's happened, now the recruiters and the hiring managers and everybody that's involved in talent acquisition are focused on, rightfully so, a lot of initiatives. They want to get the right hire. They want to pay attention to DEI. They want to get the right role filled by the right person and skill set. But all those factors are moving parts and pieces because they involve different entities speaking into them. Okay. So I think possibly when we look at job descriptions and maybe the write-up of them, there could be a change up to that. And even just telling a different story or a better story, that might be a way to redirect it. But I will say there's great companies out there that are doing it right, that see the person.
Oh, absolutely. And my thing is this, even when we have these discussions on the platform, it's recruiters and job seekers talking. Hiring managers and to some extent management don't get involved. And I get that they're busy and I get that it's not a priority, but you have to have all the players at least willing to talk about it. And it's not a right or wrong. You know, some things are, 2 wrongs don't make a right. We can talk about ghosting. We could talk about this and that. Point is this, let's get past all that stuff and figure out how we can make the entire process better. That's me on my Don Quixote, hoping for the best sort of thing.
No, I hear you. And I think even just an empowerment of the HR entity in a company that allows them to be infused in a well-respected way to the process. Because at the end of the day, Kenneth, you're exactly right. It's everybody. And if everyone has to pause and recognize they have to take the time inside the hiring process, which time is the one thing everybody doesn't want to give up because they're like, I got to do my job. But their job has to include hiring.
And I remember trying to set aside time in my when I was working to hire and interview people. It was never easy to try to get people together to even have the conversation.
It's really tough. And I think it's offering grace on all sides. It's not been easy on job seekers. I mean, I know for a fact that there is a requirement in some states to post the role, even if they've already slotted and targeted and are interviewing somebody internally for it. I can appreciate the law that requires that, but I also think that that's so unfair to a job seeker when they think it's a legit opening, when in reality, the company already has someone internally that they're promoting. And I don't say that that's wrong. That's a really exciting thing to have a company that allows a forward path. That's what most people want, is to grow with a company. So when you got all the agitation that occurred in the pandemic, some of that is because systems are broken. Like, laws are there supposedly to help, but in reality, the company fulfills the checkbox of posting a role, but has no intention of fulfilling it with outside candidates because lo and behold, they have an internal one already marked. That's very common.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Even here in New Jersey and the like, there's places that we're going to start posting a salary range for a job, which is great. But if that salary range is 50 to 150,000 or some unimaginable range or some, I mean,
It
it's
doesn't help.
it's well
It's not
intentioned,
right.
you
Yeah.
know. So, but these are all. You bring up a good point. You know, one of the places that um, I used to consult at, they actually created jobs now, and they say this is for a future position, and they put that in boldface. So when you apply, you know it's not a real job. When I say real, I mean not a job for now. That's at least helpful.
It is. I mean, something is better than like having no idea, because that's why so many people were agitated. They're like, what happened there? Yeah. I've literally had candidates be on both sides of that and the insider knowledge about it. And sometimes I would just say that's why I enjoy the strategy that I do as a career coach, because it's the insider intel helping that person navigate the roller coaster that can sometimes be the hiring scene.
So again, I'm just going to pull up a comment here from Deb. There's a narrow focus when it comes to qualified candidates. It can be very disconcerting realizing so much experience, maturity, and skills will not be considered by most recruiters and hiring managers. And I'm thinking that's as much the soft skills and the people skills and the ability to do things, because that is such an underrated part of every job, to be able to manage teams and that thing. It's not quantifiable in the way that other jobs are, but you can learn in most cases what software is involved. I mean, short of something which is really complex, you can't teach some of those other things, and they're probably just as important, at least in my opinion, for certain types of jobs.
Mm-hmm. It really is a challenge, and I almost feel like kind of the real solution is that everybody's active in the solving it, which means recruiters, hiring managers, candidates. It's not just one entity focused against the other, because really there's a collaboration. So if a candidate really feels that they have the best expertise for it and they're in a conversation with a recruiter, you don't have to lead with your resume. You can lead with the conversation and learn to tell your story. Learn to tell your story in such a compelling way that that recruiter has no choice but to look and be like, I got to make sure this candidate talks to my client. And the recruiter's job, in my opinion, and there's a breakdown of that because there's different recruiting style companies. You have a recruiter, you have a sourcer, you have a hiring or an account manager. And sometimes that is fine. Sometimes there's too much disparity. To me, it's great when you can have the person who's doing the recruiting be in conversation with the hiring manager, because you're bridging the gap. But my point is that we have to own our story. We have to be able to tell that well. We also have to tell the story from the company to the candidate. And I don't want to allow us to fall back on so many excuses, because at the end of the day, everyone has a path. I believe that so firmly, Kenneth. And let's kind of keep going towards good news.
Sure.
It's a little bit daunting in news, but there are more job openings than there are unemployed people in the United States right now.
Which I'll say as a caveat is sort of true, but you have to match up people, and companies have to be willing to take some of those people who may not be the exact match and give them the opportunity. And
education back to the companies. That's what I'm saying. Like, a recruiter is in a good spot if they can be an educator to the company about that, because there's an ability to kind of break that down. However, I will say the other side of that coin is the fact that a company is retaining a recruiting firm to find them the talent that fits the role like they want it to. It's
I agree. I agree. And having talked to recruiters, they're just as frustrated as job seekers are in a different way.
Oh,
I mean,
totally.
So I think when job seekers make a blanket statement about recruiters, that's totally unfair.
It is unfair.
I
Yeah.
mean, I tried for a short time to do some recruiting when
Yeah.
I was in between jobs, and I don't know how you guys do it, to be honest.
I love it. I really do. I think it's because there's this strategy part of me that gets used in a really fun way, Kenneth, but I do love both. So, yeah.
So I think for me, the biggest challenge, I've had to look inward a lot with what I can and can't do. I mean,
Hmm.
I've made some choices the last few years, and I think sometimes when you fail at something, you learn more from failure than anything else. I mean, I've learned what I shouldn't be doing, and as
Hmm.
opposed to things I'm going to give it a try to. And I think it's an exciting time, for me and for everyone else. And I think you have to look at the waves and the setbacks as positives towards getting you to a different place, even if
Yes. No one likes going through a storm.
right.
Let's face that. But if you do learn to surf in it, you are going to come up better the other side of it. And I think that's the acknowledgement. I forget who made the comment at the beginning, like it normalizes it for all of us. It also helps you look at the other person you might be interfacing with a lot more grace because a recruiter deals with storms in life, a hiring manager does, Kenneth does, Michelle does, we all do. So we're not immune to the fact that we're going to have to deal with these harder things. And I think that does help us be more compassionate. And that's probably something that has to be infused in the hiring process in general.
Yeah, I think, I've learned a lot about how companies have budgets and how that works and time frames and have to get approvals for jobs. And it's not as simple as here's a job, I want to hire someone. I mean,
Right.
which
Right.
knowing it is helpful, but trying to get that across is a little different because it shouldn't be as complicated as, but it is. So now
I
it's at
know.
that, yeah.
Well, and if you think about it, kind of like we are complex because as human beings, we are. There's a lot of complexity to us. So to me, it sort of makes sense that it is going to be a complex process. If it was so easy, then we're negating the fact that we're human beings versus robots. Let's celebrate the fact that we are human beings. So to me, we probably should just settle into the fact that it's not an easy process. You're going to be riding a wave in terms
Yep,
of getting into your next step. And that's okay. You just learn to surf the wave that you're riding.
absolutely. And I love the idea of always learning and surfing because you never stop, and it's not just reading about the latest technology that's out there, but it's reading about anything you can do. I mean, I love Alex, Freund, who's a good friend of mine here. Failures are a part of life. If you never fail, how will you learn from your failure? And we've all had different types of failures, and it's recognizing those and just moving on, picking yourself up, doing the next thing, not being afraid to fail, because that's where you're going to learn from.
It is true. I don't like failing.
No
And
one does.
I don't think anybody does. But being competitive in life is something that makes it even harder, Kenneth. And I don't know if it would have helped me earlier in my career to have just been taught you're going to fail and you're going to fail a lot. So just recognize that's what you should keep tally of. And maybe that's part of it is as a culture, we don't really. Instead, we're like always celebrating the successes. So that's a different way to look at it. But well said by your friend.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
I mean, it's like it's almost, instead of celebrating failures, you acknowledge failures, if you will, and you just accept them. I used to love when I was working in corporate, we would have what's called the sunset review, which was a nice way of saying after a project ended, what did we screw up on and what can we make better? And everyone
Mhm.
threw everything on the table. We didn't do this right. We didn't do that right. We didn't do this right. But people were willing to share that and try to improve from that. I enjoyed the company a lot because we actually did do some work on that. I think every company, every project should have part of that, a review of, don't, whether you call it a sunset review or an after thing, just to talk about what didn't work and acknowledge it so you don't make the same mistake again and again.
I like that. But I will say I learned about this idea of celebrating failures through Lori Knudsen. Have you met Lori through this platform?
We're connected on LinkedIn and we've had a couple of chats.
Awesome. So she was, I forget if it was somebody that's through her son's school or if it was just something that she came across, but they actually celebrated the failures, like celebrated the fact that this did not work. And it was in a collegiate setting. And I thought that was kind of cool because at the end of the day, obviously like cool inventions occurred because the people failed many times in a way not to do it or not to make it. So I'm going to flip it, at least in my own mind, and be like, yay, I failed. Oh, we'll see. I'm a work in progress, Kenneth. I don't know, but I
Well,
like
I think we all are, actually, and I think it's so important to recognize that. So I want to thank you very much for chatting today. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the future very much. I'm looking
me
forward
too.
to the teaching. I'm looking forward to whatever happens. Um, I maybe call down to the principal's office, but I'll handle it.
You're going to have to share with us how it goes. That's exciting.
Well, I will, because actually what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to put together a curriculum, which is
Hmm.
kind of interesting, because this is all remote also, so it's,
Oh, wow.
I mean, because they want to put this in the classroom, but they're not ready to do it yet this semester. So we're going to try to do this remotely. But if it works out, I'll be a professor. We'll see.
Yeah, that's good. I love
And
it.
thanks a lot, everyone, for coming. I like to get back about 10, 15 minutes so everyone has the time to kind of chill before the next call. So I,
Sure.
so
Thank
I
you so
think,
much for having me,
thank you
Kenneth. I
so much,
appreciate
everyone. And have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.